All right, it's the final video roundup in terms of music that I'm going to be doing this year. This is the disappointments, the surprises, and the oh yeah, that came out this year video of 2024. Later on this week, I'll be talking about books and movies just to shake things up. I'm in a little bit of a different space just because I got hit with the sickness. Now my wife got hit with the sickness, so she is out in the main room there, and I am relegated to the office. So you get to hang out with some of my fun things on the shelves behind me, some of the books, some of the action figures, and all that fun stuff. So let's get into the disappointments of 2024. There weren't a whole lot, and most of these disappointments were more of like I was expecting more from this band or artist, and not necessarily that the album was bad, much like, I don't do a worst of 2024 just because it didn't hit with me doesn't make it a bad record. It's just it didn't connect with me. Now, these are all in alphabetical order, and that's across the board within this list. This isn't a ranked list. I've put this strategically in alphabetical order so that no record is, worse than the next. They're all just albums that disappointed me. So let's first talk about the disappointments, and we're going to start this whole list off with Aurora with What Happened to the Heart. I was really looking forward to this because I really loved Aurora's last record. It had like this really fun aspect, this really haunting, lots of like almost like ghost-like style vocalizations. It was like, it did something very new and very exciting, and I felt like What Happened to the Heart was more of the same, but lesser than her last records. Next one comes to us from David Gilmour, Luck and Strange. This is probably my least favorite of all of his solo records. I just feel like it was him having fun, and I don't begrudge him at all within this. There's a lot of writing styles that he's done with his daughter on this, and I can feel that there's this connection that he has with this music, but I'm not necessarily feeling it. I feel like a lot of these tracks are kind of half-baked, I feel like these are kind of demos that he was working with, and he didn't really allow the music to really develop organically. And it left me kind of cold, and I'm kind of saddened that this was what could be his last record. He's kind of going out on one of his weaker ones. All right, coming into the next one, I was really looking forward to this one. And once again, kind of disappointed, especially since, well, let's just talk about it. This is the Decemberists with their As It Ever Was, So It Shall Be Again. Again, I was really looking forward to this one. There was teasing that it was a return to form to some of their more proggy aspects, like The Hazards of Love and The Crane Wife. And it just kind of felt like a continuation of the last two records that we've gotten from this. I'll Be Your Girl and What a Terrible World, What a Wonderful World. I haven't really been all that excited for these past two records, and this one kind of continues that. I felt like with all their albums leading up to that point of What a Terrible World, What a Wonderful World, I felt like each record really had a unified identity. Like The Crane Wife had a unified identity that was very different than Her Majesty, which was very different than Long Live the King or The King is Dead. Like each album really had that unifying feel. And I feel like all the records that have come past that have just been collections of tracks and songs that they were writing rather than coming into a studio to really bang out an album. And that was one of the things that I loved about the Decemberists. Like they were coming in to create an album, and this one just kind of left me flat. And their big epic, the big 19-20 minute record or track that ends this record off, it just I felt like they were wandering the landscape a little too much within that more doomy atmospheric sound rock moment on that track, and it didn't really satisfy my coming together for a big epic, and I know that they can do it. They did it with The Train. They did it with the entire album of The Hazards of Love. So I know that they're able to craft these big proggy moments. Heck, with The Crane Wife, The Island. And I just felt like this was them wandering the landscape and not quite knowing what to do. So yeah, a little bit disappointed with that one. Moving on, let's talk about Dune and their Voidkind album. Dune had my favorite record from 2021, I think it was. So I was really looking forward to this one. And it's good, but it never reaches the same heights as their last record. It never really like had those buildups and payoffs that I was really looking forward to. It's a lot more atmospheric, and I mean, that's fine if that's what you're coming to for this band, but that's not the only reason why I'm coming to this band. I love their buildups. I love their payoffs. I love those really meaty jam sessions that they have, and I just didn't quite feel it in the same vein that I have with their past works. This one might be their weakest record in my mind, but you know, again, it was the expectations that I was bringing into this record. The same can be said about this next record of Leprous, Melodies and Atonement. Again, we were being teased, quite literally, with some of the singles on this. We had Renard screaming and yelling again that he hasn't done in quite a while. You know, Opeth did it to some pretty good success this year. And, you know, their last two records of Pitfalls and, I can't even remember it. Is that really bad? Philion, that's it. Again, they just kind of left me cold, you know, a little bit more atmospheric. It felt much more like in our solo project. And last year we got a really good record from him. You know, 16 was really good. He was stretching his legs. He was trying different things. He was kind of showing his, you know, virtuosity within his landscapes of different sounds. And I was hoping that he brought that into this project, and every track was just the same kind of paint by numbers Lepers tracks that we'd gotten in the past. Sure, they're heavier. Yeah, there's a little bit more dynamics within the mixing and within the masteries of this, but it's just, you can only take so much copy and paste throughout an album before it starts to run cold and starts to run, you know, not as exciting. So yeah, Melodies of Atonement really left me cold, especially since their last handful of records really did so. But this was the one that kind of did a bait and switch, especially with all the lead ups to this record. So yeah. Another one that we'll talk about, coming more into the pop, because I really love the pop records that were coming out this year. Let's talk about St. Vincent and All Born Screaming. Even though this made it onto my top 50 list, you know, Daddy's Home and some of her past works I really loved. I love that more kind of like Stevie Nicks style, 70s style of the singer-songwriter. And this one didn't have that same kind of teeth. It didn't have that same kind of oomph. It is darker. It's a little bit more sharper, but it didn't have that same kind of immediate hook that I loved about St. Vincent's work. So a little bit disappointed in that one. Also, one that really disappointed me. Yeah, let's talk about Taylor Swift with her The Tortured Poets Department. This year was set up to be like Taylor Swift's year. You know, she had her Eras tour that was making its way all across the world at this point. It wasn't just confined to the US. We had the movie, you know, it was streaming on Disney Plus. Everybody was reaching back into her back catalog. She was redoing a bunch of records, and like she was lining herself up to a really easy win. And the Tortured Poets Department kind of failed on a lot of different ways. You know, the way that it was released, having a smaller record being released those first couple of weeks, and then surprise, here's an even bigger one that you now have to buy again. Marketing wise, you know, it was very smart, but for a consumer's point of view, I felt burnt. You know, I felt kind of betrayed, where, you know, I bought her vinyl and CD on date of release, and then surprise, that was the wrong version. You actually should have bought in this big deluxe, the anthology. And then the music that's found on there was lackluster, and I don't know, it didn't have that same kind of heart and that same kind of soul. There wasn't that hunger that I felt like she had on her past works. You know, it wasn't like the Lockdown Session records that she had for Evermore and Folklore, which I really loved. And it didn't have that same kind of feeling that Midnight's did, you know, where there was a little bit of variety. There was a little bit of differentiations on it. The Tortured Poets Department is far too long with too many tracks that sound the exact same. So yeah, in a year that was full of pop icons coming into their own, Taylor Swift dropped the ball hard. So yeah, I was really disappointed with that one. Okay, moving on, let's talk about Twerp, TWRP, with their Digital Nightmare. Another one that I was really looking forward to. I love Twerp. And even with Digital Nightmare, it's a good record. And that's why I always put the disclaimer at the top of the episode of saying, like, these disappointments aren't bad records. And in fact, I would say that Digital Nightmare is a good record. It's just earlier in the year, right around the crest of 2023 to 2024, they put out this brilliant EP of VHS. And each track on that album was banger after banger after banger. And I think there's only like 4 tracks on there. But like, it's some of the best work that Twerp has done in terms of that funky bass groove, that really inventive vocal stylings, coming into this like disco-y, danceable electronic music that I love from Twerp. And then we come into Digital Nightmare, and outside of the first and last track off of this, most of it is forgettable, And that's kind of what I felt with their last full-length record. And I felt like with the EP of VHS, I'm like, we're getting into that exciting, very catchy, very immediate, danceable grooves. And this one just kind of, once again, left me flat, and I was really disappointed with that one. Final 2, because there's 10 of them. Final 2, let's talk about the Von Herzen brothers, In Memoriation. I loved Red Alert in the Blue Forest, one of my favorite records of 2022, I think it was, that it came out, 2022, 2023. So I was really looking forward to what the Von Herzen brothers was going to have next. And In Murmuration is fine, it's a good record, but what I loved about Red Alert was how prog it was. We had a couple tracks that were in the 10-minute mark. There was a lot of build-ups, a lot of payoffs, a lot of play-outs that I really, really appreciated. And this one kind of strapped all that out. There's only like 1 or 2 tracks on here that I'll return to. The rest is just fun rock music with a little bit of a proggy edge to it. And it just, with how much I loved Red Alert, I was really looking forward to whatever Von Herzen brothers had coming out next. And this one, it left me cold. The final one within the disappointments, let's talk about Weather Systems with Ocean Without a Shore. Kind of being the unofficial successor of Anathema. I should have liked this a lot more, but I think what really held it back was how much they clung and clutched the Anathema brand. Calling the band Weather Systems, which is essentially, one of their most popular records. And the songwriting the song styles is almost too closely resembling Anathema. I just feel like Dan Kavanagh could have done a little bit more, and maybe should have, reframed this as more of like a solo project rather than a successor. And yeah, I don't know. Once again, it just left me cold. And I feel like within these disappointments, that's kind of the flavor that I'm feeling within that. All right, let's talk about some of those surprises. Now, these aren't necessarily my favorite records of the year, but these were the ones that I found I liked a lot more than I was expecting to. And once again, these are alphabetical. We'll start with the first one being Anabis with The Unforgivable. That's the one. This one kind of came out of nowhere for me. Their last record really left me cold, if I'm being perfectly honest. That was a big disappointment, especially coming from a long run of brilliant records. I was really disappointed with that last record, but this one put them back on track. And I loved how it was essentially one track divided throughout the runtime of this album, and it really surprised me. I really dug it. Another one that I really loved was the Firebird from Dirt Poor Robins. Now, I really loved Queen of the Night, their last record, but I feel like this one elevated it even further. It's a little bit more of a celebration of sound rather than the Queen of the Night, which was a little bit more doom and gloomy. And I love the story. I love how it all comes together into this really crescendo moment at the end where they kind of reintroduce and reimagine Stravinsky's Firebird Suite. Really love that one. A lot of fun on that. Let's talk about Frost, Life Within the Wires. This one really surprised me. Their last 2 records of, Day for Night, and Falling Satellites, wasn't a big fan of. I really didn't connect with those records at all. But this one felt like they were going back to what worked within Milliontown and Experiments in Mass Appeal and kind of move the music forward. This is a proper double disc concept record, and I really enjoyed that. I believe this one won the Prog Report's Album of the Year, and it was very well deserved. I can't argue with that. Wasn't necessarily my favorite record of the year, but it got us back to, what I loved about Frost. Next up is Haven of Echoes with Memento Vivere. Yeah, their first record didn't really do too much for me, and I know a lot of people love that record. I don't know, it didn't have like the substance, it didn't have the juice, as I like to say. But Haven of Echoes proves themselves, to be within the more modern neo-prog, in the same vein as like an Anathema, as I mentioned before, but also like a Gazpacho. And the longer stretches of music, I think, really help this record. The actual structuring of this record is exactly what I love to hear. And they show that they can master a build-up and a payoff very, very well. A lot of these longer tracks are very satisfying for me. They're a really good time. And yeah, it really surprised me. Let's go into an album that might not necessarily be a good record, but it definitely surprised me. That was Jeremy Renard's record of Love and Titanium. The last track off of this one was really good. I didn't expect, the actor that plays Hawkeye to put out a country and western folk record that wasn't complete dog shit. And this one proved that he can do it. I know that this tackles a lot of his, after his big accident where he was, he could have essentially been completely paralyzed, but his recovery of that and what got him through it. And I really appreciate that. And that's found within this music. It's not usually my typical MO within music, but this year proved that I can step out of my comfort zone and enjoy some really good music. And that's what I found with Love and Titanium. It was a lot of fun. Let's go to a record that I will always talk about within this styling, and that is Jimmy Keegan's self-titled album, his kind of debut record. For those of you that don't know, Jimmy Keegan is an individual that's kind of picked up the mantle within the Spock's Beard era, and I felt like he is doing some of the things that I really love about, later Spock's Beard, especially within their last two records. Even though those aren't necessarily my favorite records from the band, some of the more playful aspects and some of the more kooky, quirky, and strange aspects of the band, I feel like Jimmy is more of the mastermind behind that, and he's applying a lot of that styling to this record. And I couldn't help but love this record. It was a lot of fun, and even though I wouldn't necessarily say that this is one of the best records of the year, I would definitely say this is a record that needs to be talked about. And I was kind of saddened to see that a lot of my contemporary, prog reviewers on here weren't necessarily giving this any kind of, talk about. So this is me kind of championing that. All right, let's talk about the Lemon Twigs with their A Dream Is All We Have. I know a lot of my friends and contemporaries here on YouTube love the Lemon Twigs, and their last record of Everything Harmony was their first record that I actually wanted to sit down and listen to. All their albums kind of leading up to this point, I wasn't all that excited for. I just felt like it was very same, kind of the throwback singer-songwriter, 70s, 60s rock era. And this was the first one that I'm like, oh, this is really good. It made my top 10, I think, albums of the year. And it is just an absolute delight. This is coming from my favorite styles of the 60s and 70s singer-songwriter that I really appreciate and enjoy. It's got a little bit more of the ELO, got a little bit of like the Beach Boys and the Beatles felt within this without being a complete retread. A lot of bands that are trying to do this throwback styles are just copy and pasting. But I feel like these guys are kind of coming into their own and doing it in their own style. And I really appreciate that. And I really love that one. All right, the final three, let's talk about Pure Reason Revolution with Coming Up to Consciousness. Their last two records, again, after their big hiatus, I wasn't all that excited for. But this was the first one that really connected with me. And part of that might be it's a little shorter. I think the tracks are a lot meatier, and I feel like they took their time with this one. This is probably their best work since The Dark Third, the big album that launched them into the stratosphere within this. And I really found myself coming back to this one. Again, it didn't necessarily make my top 50, but it really surprised me, and I really enjoyed coming back to this one. All right, final two, let's talk about Rosaline Cunningham, To Shoot Another Day. Her first two records in the solo project that she's working on were still good. I still kind of prefer when she's working with Person, but these albums are still a lot of fun, and this was the one that really surprised me. This is my favorite record in this kind of solo sandbox that she's working with. It's got that throwback, more psychedelic side of the singer-songwriter side of things, blending a little bit of the harsher tones, getting flavors of like Heart and Stevie Nicks and things like that have a little bit more teeth, but just as enjoyable and just as immediate. So some really great stuff from Rosalie Cunningham. Really like that one. And the final one was one that I feel like not a lot of people were talking about in terms of the progressive metal side of things, and that is Whom God Destroy with Insanium. Again, I feel like Whom Gods Destroy didn't really connect with a whole lot of people, but I had a lot of fun with this one. Not necessarily the best, far and away from the best, but it just surprised me. Debut record, it's a little cringe, especially within, an album title like Insanium, from Whom Gods Destroy. But there's just something so fun about it. It's bringing me back to like Camelot or Symphony X in terms of like that just fun, balls to the wall, insane, progressive metal. Without it being too tech death metal, without it being too extreme death metal. This is just classic capital M metal within the prog vein. And I just had a great time with it. I absolutely had a great time with it. All right, let's talk about these records that I kind of forgot came out this year. And it wasn't until this big, cycle of let's look back on 2024 to remind myself what's coming out. These were the albums that I kind of just completely forgot about. First off was Beardfish, Songs for Beating Hearts. Not a bad album, not a great album. It was just an album. Same with Big Big Train, The Likes of Us. Again, I keep saying this, and I'll say this about this album forever. The first 3 tracks of this album are some of the best music that Big Big Train has done in a while. Like, we're coming on decades. The second half of this record, it's kind of forgettable in my mind. Devin Townsend with Power Nerd. This was a record that just kind of came and went, it's not a bad record. It's quite a good record, but he's done this style before. And I feel like this is just Devin having fun, and I will praise the man for just having fun. I'm really looking forward to see what he has in store for us in 2025. Hopefully it's going to be The Moth. Hopefully it's going to be amazing. But yeah, this one just kind of left me, once I listened to it and once I digested it, I'm like, all right, I've heard it. I can put it on the shelf. It's not like an Empath or a Teria where I'm going to come back to it time and time and time again. This is going to be kind of like an Addicted or an Accelerated Evolution where it's like, okay, I heard it. It's fine. I think I don't need to listen to it again. Same with Collapse the Wave. Now, their last record of 42, I really, really loved. And this one, even though I would say is probably from start to finish a better record, it didn't have that big epic. It didn't have that thing that made me want to come back to it time and time again. Same with Kappa with, I'm going to try it, Sumarguriologius. Jeez. Probably one of their better records within recent memory. But it didn't have that stay power that some of their classic records like Notes from the Past, Keyholder, or In the Wake of Evolution. It's just fine. It came out relatively early this year and it kind of came and went, and that's about it for it. Another one that I know this is going to be really controversial because I know a lot of people loved this record, but for me, Neil Morse, No Hill for a Climber was just fine. It was good and probably his best record that he put out this year because he put out 3 because my man can't sit still. But it kind of, it kind of found its way into the same kind of vein as like Sola Gratia or The Grand Adventure or, some of those, like, I want to say B tier, which is not really such a great thing, but, like Transatlantic's Kaleidoscope, for the diehard Neil Morse fans, they're going to love this record, and they have loved this record, and I'm really excited about that. But if I'm being perfectly honest, for me, who likes his more innovative, more fun things, like I really love Jesus Christ the Exorcist. I really love Similitude of a Dream. I love these big proggy moments. And I just felt like No Hill for a Climber was him just kind of getting back into the groove of things. So I'm really excited to see what his next prog project is going to be. For me, this was just fine. It was fine. It's a great record, but it's also kind of Neil Morse paint by numbers, if I'm being perfectly honest. So, yeah. Talking about another one that was just kind of forgettable was the Pineapple Thief, It Leads to This. I can't necessarily say this was a disappointment for me because their last, 5, 6 records for me never really connected. This one was one of the better ones, but I think since All the Wars, all the records from the Pineapple Thief has really been forgettable for me. And it's a shame for me because I know they're finding an audience and I know that they're connecting with people on a much bigger scale than they ever had with albums like Variations from a Dream, Somebody Here Is Missing, Tightly Unwound. But those were my favorite records, you know, those longer stretches of music, the tracks that go into the 12, 15, 20-minute mark that allowed them to really grow a track. I know, this one just didn't do it for me. All right, let's talk about Return to the Earth with Stalagmite Steeple. I know a lot of people are loving Return to the Earth. Their last record of, I believe it was The Watcher or something along those lines, it didn't connect with me. And this was another one that really didn't connect with me. I was kind of hoping that with the success of Haven of Echoes, which kind of is doing very similar things, I was hoping that Return to the Earth was going to connect with me this year. And in the end, it just left me cold. So, yeah, another kind of forgettable one, oddly enough, was Rick Wakeman with Yes, Sonata. It's fine, you know, 2 tracks, both into the 20-minute marks. The first one being a bunch of his piano works from the Yes catalog. And then the second one being a kind of medley of the King Arthur. It's fine on paper, but honestly, once I kind of digested it and listened to it, I don't think I'm going to be returning to it at all. Not a bad record. Just kind of a forgettable one. And the final one that I want to talk about is The Tangent with To Follow Polaris. Honestly, on paper, this is actually quite a good record. And Andy being kind of the only one working on this record, I really, really want to applaud him for that. But it didn't connect with me as much as I was really hoping it would with some of his past work, like Proxy and Le Sac de Travail. You know, even going back further with A Place in the Queue, Not As Good as the Book, The Music That Died Alone, The World That Divides, The World That We Drive. It felt like it was better than some of his past works like Auto Reconnaissance, The Slow Rust of the Forgotten, blah, 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 and Songs from the Hard Shoulder, but it didn't reach that same kind of oomph that I was really hoping for. Again, I want to applaud Andy because this is some of the best music that he's done since probably Proxy from 2018, but still didn't have that same hit. So yeah, this is why it's kind of in the forgettable rather than a surprise or a disappointment, because, you know, it's kind of right in between the two. So yeah, that's my list. And the final, you know, I'm going to leave everybody off here with what I'm excited for in 2025, what I'm really looking forward to. Really, there's only like 3 records on the docket at the moment that I'm looking forward to. Pattern Seeking Animals. Oh, Ekelin as well. So 4. Ekelin's coming out with their 1-2 album Punch. Steven Wilson with his 2-track album and Dream Theater. So, you know, we got 4 records that I'm really excited for within the next coming months. But what I'm most excited for within 2025 is the same thing that I've been excited for pretty much every year since about 2020. And that is discovering new artists, discovering new acts that really push my boundaries and really surprise me. Like all of the records, I think, since 2020 have been from acts that I didn't even know about coming into that year. Like Zio from 2020 with their Flower Tortornia. 2021, I believe, was Dune. 2022, if I'm not mistaken, that was Toe Hider. 2023, last year, was Bear Ghost. And this year was The Last Dinner Party. Like all those bands and records, I didn't really know or were too familiar of going into that year. So I'm really looking forward to whatever band or artist really surprises me in 2025. So here's hoping that 2025 is a good year. I want to thank you all so much for watching. This is kind of my final send-off of the year. My next 2 will be about books and movies, so we're kind of moving away from music for a little bit. But I want to know what were some of the disappointments for you for this year. What are you most looking forward to in 2025? And I just hope 2024 was a good year for you. I know I've capped off all these videos with that, but I really do hope 2024 was a good year. It's going to be interesting in 2025, but, you know, I hope we all stick together. I hope we all support one another. We all are in this together, and here's hoping that 2025 is better than what we expect. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.